Welcome back to the TapRooT Podcast. This week we're going to be talking about when to get legal involved in your investigations. I'm joined by Mark and Amy, and at the start of this I want to say we are not lawyers. None of this constitutes legal advice, but we do recommend that you talk with your lawyers and maybe use this as a conversation with them to come up with some strategies for when to get them involved and how to get them involved. So I think the first question in here is, why would you get your lawyers involved in investigations? Is there an advantage in doing this?
Of course there's an advantage of doing this, and I think before you have an incident, you should have had your legal team involved and done some talks and some conversations about what that looks like when an incident does occur. You really don't want to start this process when you are in the middle of investigating an incident. You want to start it way before then.
Should your lawyers actually know what an investigation process looks like? Would that be a good thing for them to have some knowledge in the TapRooT process?
Probably.
Absolutely, I think it would. You know, I know we have been
you
involved.
Ever taught lawyers before?
I have not, but you
have.
I have taught several lawyers.
I have. I've taught a whole classroom full of lawyers.
Oh.
Boy, that was a challenge. 50 lawyers in a one-day class. Oh, we won't do that again.
That's the best kind of one day you can have. I have found definitely our leadership course really works well for the lawyers because it's just enough detail that they understand it, but not so much detail that you are really bogged down in distracted questions like if they go through the 5-day. Not that we don't want lawyers to go through the 5-day. It probably would be really helpful to them. But we've had different levels of advice about this. So we want to get lawyers involved. Ideally, they have some knowledge about what is TapRooT.
Well, let me ask you a question then, Alex. You say involved. Is that involved in doing the investigation? Is that involved in reviewing the investigation? Is that involved in writing the report? How do you mean involved?
So that's another good point at the beginning is what role is your legal playing in the investigation? I don't think your legal being the lead investigator that's probably not the right route to go. Again, depends on industry maybe, but
well, it also depends on what their training and background is.
Yep. But there's definitely value of having them involved, especially when there's potential, we'll say, litigation. So if there is a potential for litigation, having your lawyer involved would allow some of it to be covered under privilege, some of the investigation.
It could allow it.
It could allow it. It does depend. And again, this is where talking with your lawyer has a really good way of understanding what what will be covered under privilege and what probably won't.
Well, interesting you mentioned that because state to state there's differences in the United States, but we also have clients who are in different countries in the United States and have different laws. So you might have considerable variation in when to get legal involved, depending on where you're located.
Oh, I'm getting a headache already just thinking about all the legal.
And we should clarify, a second ago you said different countries in the United States. Did
Oh,
you mean counties?
No, I meant different countries in the world.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Maybe I'm just backwards. I don't know.
So there's advantages of having legal possibly for some confidentiality, but there's also advantages in there's some personality traits that at least I've experienced with lawyers of very detail oriented. They have some training in what I would call typically not causality, but in the way you present evidence. So they can often provide advice in how you should document your evidence so that it might hold up in court. They can help provide
and what needs to be saved, for instance.
Yes.
What evidence needs to be saved, protected.
So again, having legal involved in some of those areas certainly can provide some benefits. Is there areas where you think legal could be a hindrance in your investigation? Not that legal is ever a hindrance for the lawyers in the chat.
I think one of the basic differences is that the way the law looks at it a lot of times is who's to blame. And the way an incident investigator looks at it is trying to not have blame involved and find out what went wrong with the systems that caused the human to make a mistake, rather than who made the mistake? Okay, they're to blame. And so one of the things that's really important up front is that your legal team recognizes the difference in doing a root cause analysis. We're not trying to place blame, although their court case that they have coming out of an accident may be focused on who's to blame, who gets the liability for this. And those are two totally different ways of looking at things.
Yeah, and I think that's similar to if you have, a completely different podcast here, but when to involve HR in your investigations. But it's similar to that as a different perspective. Again, if there is someone made a mistake, is this something that is going to be used as grounds for termination or things like that? And having legal involved or even HR involved in those cases might be beneficial.
I remember a quote one guy said is, well, first we do the discipline and then we find out why it happened, because we don't want the discipline to keep people from participating in the investigation.
Yeah, so
it's a different way of looking at it, isn't it?
That is.
Mm-hmm.
It's the true just culture. So if we're going to have legal involved, they might be providing benefits when it comes to guidance on what to keep, where to cover things, how to write things in ways, and document. I have experienced different things with legal as well, involved in investigations. One thing I don't know that I would recommend is having lawyers present during interviews. That really can be controversial.
But sometimes you can't avoid it.
Correct. So is there a difference between a deposition and a interview for evidence collection?
Boy, it sort of depends, doesn't it?
It does.
If there's a fatality and you're interviewing somebody and that's going to be used later on in who knows what kind of proceedings, I, as the interviewee, may want my lawyer to be present. And you may not have any choice as the investigator as to whether that happens or not. On the other, and there may be another lawyer. You could have a lawyer for the union involved. You could have an employee representative for the union involved. In that case, you're probably going to have a company lawyer involved, and all of a sudden you've got one guy being interviewed and 6 people around the table, 3 or 4 of them being lawyers, and you're sitting there going, "Oh gosh,
that's not intimidating."
No,
at all.
That's not intimidating. We're gonna definitely get the truth and nothing but the truth in this investigation.
I think we'll get nothing out of that.
It could be.
There's not enough rapport building you can do in the beginning of that interview to help make everyone comfortable, is there?
Yeah, I kind of think of, it's almost like the opposite of what we teach is rapport building. We want to make sure that we're making people feel comfortable. There's almost nothing more uncomfortable than, and this lawyer is here.
More uncomfortable would be the FBI doing the interview for the investigation, and they start off with, "You have the right to remain silent."
Plead the fifth. So if we're using legal in an interview, it's probably not going to get us as much information as we want. So that does make a little bit of a difference. Something else that I've seen before. Again, your legal counsel is often not on site. So especially large international companies, their lawyers may not be present. So that might change the structure of your interview if legal has to be involved. Instead of it being I'm in a room with you, we're building rapport face to face, now I am on a Zoom meeting or a Microsoft Teams meeting and I'm staring at this person. It shifts a little bit in the conversation, in the rapport, and can definitely change what information you get. So I think that, a lot of people underestimate those kind of small conversations you have when doing a facilitation or investigation. It's not always I'm getting all my information from sitting across a table with somebody. A lot of the times it's in the walking in between locations or while you're out staring at the site or where things happened. Those little conversations can really give a lot of detail. And if your legal has to be present for a lot of those, it changes those opportunities that you have in your investigation.
It could be you're sitting at lunch and they're just talking across the table eating lunch and they're giving you oh man, this is good stuff.
Yeah.
And there's nobody present but you and them eating lunch.
Breaking bread is definitely one of the best ways to get information.
The 3 pizza investigation.
It's part of the secret of the 3 pizzas. So when we're doing these things and we're involving legal, we definitely have to take into account what the effect of the presence of legal counsel can have on an investigation. So those are definitely some things to keep track of. Is there any other advice that you would give people when dealing with legal, or possibly even legal from outside of your organization? Is there anything that you need to be mindful of when communicating with third-party organizations that might involve legal?
Well, we already talked about having them have training in TapRooT before they go to participate in an interview, so they know what you're trying to accomplish and know how you're trying to accomplish it. That might be very helpful. Obviously, having the conversation that you suggested at the beginning of this before the accident happens is very important. It gets harder and harder the further you get along in doing the investigation, when legal comes in and starts saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't talk to this person. All of a sudden, sources of evidence start leaving, and they aren't allowed. You're not allowed to do that. And wow, okay, well, that sort of puts a dent in my investigation.
And I think there's something as well for when you're legal. What are they there for? They're there to protect, I'll say, the company. Maybe not necessarily you personally, but a lot of times they are there to protect you personally as an investigator, because as a part of the company. And when you're talking with third parties, whether that's insurance companies or regulators or those kind of outside sources, as an investigator, your legal actually does provide some defense for you in those situations. I know if I was having to be deposed, I would want my legal counsel there to let me know when I shouldn't answer a question. I think that's definitely one of the best benefits of having good legal counsel is that kind of advice. Is there situations like that can come to mind for the benefits of legal?
Well, I always think of let's say you've done the investigation now, and then you get called to testify. The thing I have to impress on people when I'm coaching them before that is, you can testify to the facts. You can't testify that what they told you is true. So it isn't really a fact. Or you can say, someone told me this, but unless you went out and saw something firsthand, observed a video firsthand, you don't want to speculate. You don't, unless you're an expert in whatever it is you're having an opinion on, have an opinion. You're just relaying the facts, and that's really hard to say what is a fact and what isn't. Like I said, Joe told me that this happened doesn't make it a fact. Unless you can get some other evidence, or then you can say, well, I have this and this and this, which points me to the belief that this happened. Then you can say that, but it's really hard. And people want to have opinions, and they sort of think this is like one of those legal shows where somebody's going to go, aha! But really isn't. You should be testifying to the facts.
Court should be boring. It needs to, it
should usually it usually settles before you ever get in front of a judge, but that's a whole other issue.
We don't want the exciting.
But depositions aren't in front of a judge, so that's not going to be there.
Yeah. So we want to use our legal. We want to involve them. Is there any ideas for where there might be friction, any other opportunities for friction in an investigation that might come to your mind?
Yeah, they don't want you to use a word, or they don't want you to say something. And once again, you need to say, well, what's a fact and what's an opinion? If they don't want you to put your opinions in the investigation, that's a reasonable thing for them to request. If they want you to delete the facts, that may be a little less reasonable.
I think having the dotted lines helps with that a little bit, because you can really, mark, this is based on a report from a person or what we believe versus we have a hard video evidence of exactly
Explain
this timeline.
what you mean by dotted lines.
Oh, on our SnapCharT. So the best place to involve legal, arguably, is the SnapCharT because it's the timeline of what happened. It's where you keep all your information. And on your SnapCharT, there are events and conditions. You can mark an assumption on there by dotting a line around either.
A dotted line rather than a solid line.
Yep. So that could say, hey, we believe this person opened this valve. We don't know that. We know the valve got opened. This person was in the area. Those are facts. But we don't have evidence to say that this person exactly was the one that opened it. But we believe it based on context.
And especially after fatalities, when your witness isn't able to testify because they're dead, sometimes a lot of those things you've got to say, well, this happened. They were in the area. We think they did this. And maybe you don't have a video or some other source to prove that. In fact, sometimes it might even be that you have to make assumptions because you have to assume this was done because there was nobody there to witness it. And it should be clearly an assumption rather than a fact.
Yeah, and it's the valve had to be opened.
Well, sometime it got opened. We don't know who did it, but this was the only person there. It pretty much means it was them.
So kind of on maybe a last point, but I think back to one of the summit talks that we had. We had the EPA investigators they were giving a talk on keeping yourself out of court for an environmental investigation and how they used TapRooT. And they actually had one of their attorneys present, which, legal presenting can be a great talk or a terrible talk, but this was a really interesting talk. And they were talking about how they used the SnapCharT for evidence collection and documentation and kind of how TapRooT was helping their legal team look at liability and that leadership, we'll call it, culpability for if it was and I forget the term off the top of my head because this was about 4 years ago, but it was if it was a willful violation or deliberate, something like that. That's one of the things they were looking at. I can't remember the exact term, but that was, I think, a really good talk and a good case of legal being involved in an investigation and how TapRooT can help enhance and make their job easier as well. So if you want to learn more about utilizing TapRooT, when to involve legal, the best case is the 5-day course that goes into our...
They're not going to learn more about that in the 5-day course. They're going to learn how to use TapRooT better,
Well,
which will then help them when they get legal involved.
In the 5-day, we do cover when to get legal involved. That is in there. It's a little section.
How many minutes? Probably about as many minutes as this has been.
Maybe about. So
I do think we cover it a lot, too, in the evidence and interviewing course, too. It comes up more than it might in the 5-day.
Yeah. So both of those options are a great place to learn TapRooT and also learn how to do in major investigations. And part of that is involving your legal team. So if you want to learn more about how to do those investigations and send your lawyer to a 5-day, you can find that link out down below. So we hope to see them there. And
when you want to do your interviews, send the lawyer to a 5-day and then do the interviews really quick.
So we hope to see you and your legal team there at the next 5-day. Again, course dates are down below. So we'll catch you there and catch you on the next TapRooT Podcast.